Well, very interesting situation unfolding in Afghanistan. Apparently, I saw on my phone this morning that there were reports that a passenger plane had gone down over somewhere in Afghanistan last night, and that there were about 80 people on board. And that didn't sound too good. It sounds like, passenger plane flying over a war zone probably was shot down by accident. We just had that happen quite recently in Iran when that Ukrainian Airlines plane went down, and that killed, 180 people. But it turns out that that original report came from a statement by the Afghan government, the one in Kabul that's backed by the U.S. and NATO. The press, being the stenographers for government that they are, just sort of printed that without any qualifiers, just saying, oh yeah, here we go. A plane must have, passenger plane went down in Afghanistan. Well, it turns out now the government has retracted that story. Because I guess we can't rely on the media to try and do the digging and come up with the stories for us. So we have to wait for governments to tell us that what they said was wrong. And so there's no official word yet from the governments involved, whether it be the U.S. or the Afghan government, about what this plane exactly was. That is until, lo and behold, the Taliban rears their heads once again to claim that this plane was not a passenger jet. It did not have civilians on board, but rather this was a U.S. Air Force jet. And not a fighter jet like an F-16 or an F-35. They didn't shoot down anything like that. This was not a combat aircraft. This was I guess you'd call it a personnel transport aircraft. It was essentially like a commuter jet. Like one of those Bombardier, smaller jets that are, below the sorts of the size planes that, say, Boeing and Airbus build, but bigger than, your normal private jet that the folks take to Davos. And so if you're only looking at the type of plane, it does seem appropriate to assume that this was some kind of civilian aircraft with civilians on board going somewhere. However, now we have footage from the crash scene put out courtesy of the Taliban from people who went up to see this plane after it crashed. And it crashed in the snow, because it does snow over there. It's actually a rather picturesque scene. It's completely white everywhere except for this smoldering fuselage. And there really is nothing left of the plane. It's burned down. I didn't see any dead bodies there. You didn't see people scattered around. There appeared to be nobody left at the crash site. Which is strange. You would think, well, if these are civilians, where are they going to go? Unless they were taken away by an ambulance, some Taliban ambulance. You would think that they would still be sitting there at the scene of the crash, bleeding out or whatever. But when you look a little closer, you notice something that stands out pretty well on the side of the plane, and that is a big star with some stripes around it. And it turns out that this appears to be a U.S. Air Force plane. And before I forget, I want to give credit to this guy Tariq Ghaznawal, I believe is how you say his name. He's in Afghanistan, and I guess he walked up and found all this information himself. So he's the reason why we know what has gone down, because the U.S. military is not saying anything. They are not saying that they just lost a plane with a bunch of people on it, and that those folks were either killed or captured by the Taliban. Now, it's still not clear who exactly was on this plane. It's clear that this plane was owned by the Air Force, and so probably was piloted by U.S. Air Force pilots. However, the Taliban are claiming that the people on board this plane were, they're saying, high-ranking CIA officers. Now, I don't know how they would unless they had intelligence on, who was on this plane before they shot it down. I don't know how they would know that these are high-ranking CIA officers, because it looks like whoever was on board probably would have gotten charred pretty well. Or who knows, maybe the fire wasn't that bad when the plane landed, and after the crash is when the fire really got going. I guess that's possible. So maybe these guys could have been pulled out with their bodies intact and, found some kind of ID on them. So according to them, 5 people were killed. with 2 of those being the pilots and I guess 3 other guys. I'm not sure exactly how many people were on the plane. It is interesting that the Taliban or the Afghan government said that it was 80 people. I think that maybe that was just a cover story, and that there weren't actually 80 CIA officers or whoever on this plane. Now, I'm not too familiar with how the U.S. Air Force uses these planes, but again, by the looks of it, this was a fairly cozy jet. This isn't something that you're going to use to move grunts around. And of course, typically, you would do major troop movements in land vehicles or over the water. You wouldn't be flying troops around in planes unless they're going to a very specific destination to carry out some mission. But like I said, this was not really an aircraft that you would see anywhere near the combat. It's not like guys were going to parachute out of the back of this thing. It had a pressurized cabin and all. So that tells me that this is the kind of thing that they would use to cart around at least Air Force officers, but definitely also would be intelligence officers. I'm just not again, like I said, we can't know for sure that the Taliban's telling the truth because they've given us no evidence that these are CIA guys. But that wouldn't surprise me if they were telling the truth. Now, maybe saying high ranking is just them trying to blow smoke up their own rear ends and make their kill look a little more impressive. They might be trying to fudge the picture a little bit to make their 7-point look like a 10-point. Now, in the aftermath of this, I don't think anything real serious is going to happen. I mean, the U.S. is already at war with the Taliban. It's not like Iran shot down this plane full of CIA guys. And even if they did, I believe it's standard CIA policy not to confirm nor deny the deaths of any of its agents. So I don't think that they could directly respond to this. Although maybe the CIA thing isn't as complicated here, since this wasn't some dark unofficial plane. This was a marked U.S. Air Force plane, which tells me that the United States will probably acknowledge this at some point. And I think that they probably realized that the Taliban were going to release evidence that this was in fact their plane. And that's why they had the Afghan government retract that lie cover story about this being some passenger jet. Now, something I thought that was a little ironic to consider is that maybe the Taliban shot down this plane with a Stinger missile, one of the Stinger missiles that Ronald Reagan gave them back in the 80s when they were fighting the Soviet Union, which they used to great effect to shoot down Soviet aircraft. But who knows where they're getting their weapons these days? Those have probably all dried up by now. But I believe back in 2007 even, they reportedly had actually used U.S. Stinger missiles to shoot down a British helicopter. It's so easy to really lose perspective when you follow this stuff day to day, because, as I've said so many times, this has been going on for almost my entire life. And, it's a cliche, but war never really changes. This crap just keeps dragging on. And, more stuff like this is always going to happen. As long as, President Trump refuses to fulfill his campaign pledge to get the troops out of Afghanistan, which he said he was going to do on day one because he thought it had been long enough. I think everyone agrees that it's been long enough. I think you would have not bipartisan support in Congress, but bipartisan support across the United States, as far as the American electorate goes, if Trump actually just, unilaterally withdrew everyone from Afghanistan and said, no, we're done today. This is the end of it. We've been there long enough. You've had enough time to set up your fancy little government. It's either going to work now or it isn't. Because that's the truth. And the reality is, when the president, if he does make a call personally or write a letter, I guess it was. Although I don't know if presidents kept doing that after Bush, but I remember Bush would write a letter to the family of every dead soldier, I believe, or maybe that was just propaganda. But that's what they used to say on TV that George W. Bush did. And if Trump does that, I wonder if he'll consider that the lives of these men who died, are on his hands. That they're dead because of his choices, because of choices he made. And yes, you can say, oh, well, they enlisted full well knowing what they were going to be doing, and the Taliban, are bad people, and we don't like them, because even though they had nothing to do with 9/11 and never did anything to attack us, really. And in fact, they were allies of ours until 2001. Despite all that, putting all that aside, these men would not be dead if Trump had fulfilled his promise and just gotten the hell out of Afghanistan. So I'll be interested to see if the Taliban put forward any more evidence about this, maybe a name tag or something like that, or some ID badge that some of these supposed CIA folks were carrying on them. Maybe they even have the bodies. Now, I also heard that perhaps some folks actually survived the crash and escaped. I don't know if that's true, but I guess we'll find out in due time, because the Taliban are probably going to want to publicize this if they really did pull this off. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. If you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.